Welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel. Andrew, shut the fuck up, you piece of shit. Welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel. It's gonna be a wild ride. GG, motherfuckers.
Thorin vs. Reddit, episode 14. They gon' get this work. Beloved, right, let's start off here. We've got this comment here, 18 points. It emerges into a little bit of a chain of interesting comments. So this was from the team envious, breaking apart. Some of them not wanting to play with Happy anymore. And this top comment, 18 points, says, I love these comments where people are fully blaming Happy. If you guys read all the twitlongers, Scream was forced into a support role since no one else in the team wanted to do it. But hey, let's ignore what Scream said himself. Then this guy, 35 points, says, the in-game leader's role is to put his players in a position where they can be used most effectively. Putting Scream in a support position is a terrible call by him. It is all unhappy in his misuse of his players. 10 points. The original guy responds, he didn't want to put Scream in a support position. The others just refused to play a supportive role, and Scream was the most willing. Happy didn't put Scream into supporting, his team did. Right, first of all, this guy who makes the first and the last comment is absolutely just fucking with semantics and doesn't seem to understand the premise of how a team is set up and what the actual responsibilities and role of a leader is within the team. Because technically you could have someone be a tactician who just calls the strats but isn't the leader. Maybe some veteran player in the team, RPK, could be the leader, or maybe the superstar player, a Shocks, a Scream. They could say, hey, I'll be the leader, I'll lead by example, I'll corral the troops, I'll get people to follow me, but you just call the tactics. The problem is Happy is the leader in all senses in the envious squad at that point in time. So the idea that Scream was forced into a support role because no one else in the team wanted to do that role. Right, why does that mean that Scream's the one forced to do it? Like if everyone goes, right, who wants to be the support? Not me. What about him? I don't want to do it. Nope, never doing it. Why does that mean that Scream, one of the star players of the team, one of the best individual stars the French/Belgian scene's ever witnessed, why does that mean like, oh, well, sorry, Scream, no one else wants to do it, so that means automatically in our team, bizarrely, that just means you have to do it. Now, presumably, this guy's implying Scream sort of volunteered to do it because no one else would do it, right? So you know what? Yes, I'm with you. Part of that's on Scream. Some of that's his responsibility. But you know what? Even him saying, well, I'll do it if no one else will be a supportive role, still doesn't actually relinquish the responsibility from Happy, because as this guy who responded correctly says, it is the job of the in-game leader to use his players most effectively, and therefore, as a byproduct, to win matches. So since this team wasn't winning matches and the players weren't being used effectively, and particularly Scream wasn't being used effectively, and Envious lacked star power, Happy absolutely categorically failed in all respects there. Even if Scream says, well, I'll do it if no one else will, Happy's supposed to go, no, that wouldn't make sense because you're not a supportive type of player. You don't have the mentality for it or even the temperament for it, and we need firepower. So do you know what? XMS or Haji or Kiyashima or RPK, one of you's going to have to be the supportive player, mate. We'll figure it out, or I'm going to be the supportive player. How about that, right? But no, he didn't do that, and therefore the team failed absolutely, and Scream was allowed to fail as well. I often say this about in-game leaders and leaders in general, because I myself was an editor-in-chief for about 2.5 years at SK Gaming, then like a year or so at Team Acer, and when you're an editor-in-chief and you're responsible for the overall product on the site and people below you's work, yes, they are individually responsible for how good their part of the work is. But if you find out a guy can't do a job, or he just doesn't have the skill set to do it, if you let him do that, or you continue to assign him responsibilities that he cannot live up to or execute upon to any reasonable degree, initially, it might be his fault for volunteering, but eventually it's your fault for continuing to give this guy responsibilities you know he can't manage. You have to be able to analyze what he can do, what is needed on the site or in the team in this sense, and fit people accordingly. So no, this is actually ridiculous Happy apologism. This is from a thread where the CLG Red squad, I think once was lost some like show match or something. And the thread, 87 points, says, honestly, I'm still confused why they let go of their main CS roster and not this roster. Well, let's just stop and think about that. I know as a very, very casual fan that if you just look at those two squads, CLG, the original team that used to have JDM and Tariq and FNS and Cutler, And in the more recent days, you're thinking of the team with Kotler and FNS and Ricky and Ethan. You're looking at these players and you're saying, hey, these are much better players than the female squad. And if they went to a normal tournament, they'd have much better chance of doing something. In fact, they could play at the lower end of some of the international competitions, maybe sneak into the odd tier 1 tournament. Yes, on those grounds, you're right. They are a much better team than CLG Red. But what you have to ask yourself is, what does CLG the org want from their team and what do they get in return? So when they have the main CS squad, okay, they weren't paying a big salary, but they still have to pay a decent sized salary for a team that doesn't necessarily qualify for LANs. That isn't going to be a top pro league team. That isn't going to win any LANs and generally isn't going to have big personalities. A lot of their players didn't have a lot of Twitter followers, didn't use social media very effectively, didn't get into a lot of interviews, weren't big name players in the scene. So is the return on that worth it for CLG? I don't know. They would suggest no. That's why they left the scene. So why do they still have CLG Red? Well, first of all, as far as I know, CLG Red, the squad, actually was formed around something like, I think Intel as a sponsor came to, I think it was Miss Harvey, and was like, we want you to make a team. And so she took that to CLG, got them to make a female team there, and had the sponsorship already. So basically, the team's already being paid for out of money that isn't coming from CLG. CLG themselves aren't having to bankroll that. In terms of salaries, etc., I would guess it's not very much, but actually their players are more marketable than the male players of CLG. Yes, they don't go to the big male tournaments because they're not good enough and they wouldn't qualify even when they attempt to, but they play in the female tournaments, which get their own level of fanfare and especially get a lot of mainstream attention, a disproportionate amount compared to how good the actual players, teams and level of players at the tournaments and how low the significance and prestige of the tournaments are, sure, but they get BBC articles written about them, New York Times, Washington Post, big YouTube channels, people within in the esports industry, Any-Key, Intel, these massive companies. Well, Any-Key's not a massive company, but it's a project funded by a massive company. These people promote and big up these squads. So if you have one of the best female teams, which CLG Red was, then in theory, that's actually a much better way a spend of your money, and it probably even less money and less outlet because they're going to go to less tournaments, but you're going to get way more for it. Also, those people stream, and you know what? Again, disproportionate amount of streaming viewers for how good they actually are relative to the top male players and relative to the male squad. So actually, if you know the economics of the business and how the industry's set up, it's not really that confusing at all, is it? So this was from a thread. Let's face it, could be any thread about Richard Lewis, right? And by the way, I'll probably have my own separate video on that coming through soon, which will be a straight roast session. But this is one of the classic comments you get where, just like with my content, people don't discuss the ideas in the content. They just discuss me as a person, what they dislike about me as a person, whether I'm capable of being an analyst, etc. It's all just about me. They're all just caught on like surface layer, level 1 of analysing a person and their ideas. So as usual with Richard, the topic is always, oh, he's got thin skin, he blocks people on Twitter. And this guy here, 10 points, says, the sheer amount of people that comment because they got blocked is absolutely mind-blowing. I don't want to guess how many thousand people he has blocked. So for the first part, the sheer amount of people that comment because they got blocked is absolutely mind-blowing. You know what? That actually doesn't mean that they were blocked by him. I don't know if you're aware of this, but anyone on the internet can just tell any lies that they want. And unless they provide some sort of corroborative evidence, you should actually assume that what they're saying is not the truth. Now, people might say, oh, no, but Thorin, no smoke without fire, mate. First of all, that's a disingenuous analogy because that's what smoke comes from, fire. So that works with the literal example of smoke and fire, but absolutely online, you have people who lie about things. In real life, if you applied that logic to every rape case, you'd have a lot more people in prison now, many of whom didn't do any crime whatsoever and were the victims of a false claim. So you know what? The sort of person who goes on Reddit and constantly complains, like, I was blocked by this person, and you know what? I didn't even do anything, and I wasn't even dissing him, or you know what? I didn't even comment and I got blocked. If they don't link to their Twitter account and or the tweet in question, which they claim got them blocked, I don't believe them by default, because I've seen way too many people who didn't happen who lied about stuff, who just clearly were blocked for probably having a disagreement or being quite rude and impolite about how they responded to someone, and therefore got blocked because, you know what, it's that person's Twitter account. They're not obliged to read your shitty comments. And therefore the person gets bitter, goes from being like a fan who wanted to be very impolite and a bit harsh to being a straight up hater, comments in every thread, and gradually either they start out just pure liars or they gradually embellish the story of how they were blocked till it gets worse and worse and worse. And eventually it's like, and I didn't even do nothing. And then if you ever search their Reddit name, you either find no Twitter account under that name. So conveniently, it's funny, if everyone wants to say that I'm racist against Brazilians, they always link that tweet, right? Because there's evidence. Some sort of circumstantial evidence to suggest I am. They don't ever link to the tweets here that they got them blocked. Why do you think that is? I think it's because they don't have the tweets anymore. No. Now, first of all, some of them delete the tweet, which in itself suggests something, right? Secondly, the fact they don't link to the evidence. I have a general rule on the internet. If people don't link to evidence they claim to have, they don't have that evidence. You know, there's a great Christopher Hitchens quote that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And likewise, claims made without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. So I just dismiss all claims like that. Start linking them up, and then we can actually judge for ourselves whether it was unfair, whether it was egregious, and whether he's blocked you for no reason because he's thin-skinned. If you just say it, but then don't show me the evidence, I'm going to go ahead and assume that you're a liar and that you've purposely omitted your comment or the tweet because you want me to just believe you that he's some nutter and you're a totally reasonable person continually posting in threads about him, even though apparently on one hand you don't care about him, but you desperately want him to have to read your Reddit comments, Twitter comments. Similar thread, 100 points. Richard Lewis thinks he's self-appointed gatekeeper on who gets to report on esports. Now this is what's called the mind reader fallacy. Because how could this person know that Richard thinks he's a self-appointed gatekeeper who just gets to decide on what people report on esports? Now, presumably he's just speculating here, right? Based on the fact that Richard pointed out that Rosh B had engaged in some, let's just say, journalistic conduct which was unethical according to the professional standards of what's expected from journalists and how they treat their sources and the standards and process by which they garner their sources and then report stories. Now, why that would mean that Richard Lewis thinks he's a gatekeeper who just gets to decide who reports on esports, I don't know, because he didn't stop DK coming in the scene. He hasn't stopped Nell coming in the scene, who, by the way, won't even reveal his real name, so we can't even corroborate who that is. That could just be a sock puppet for a really famous person in esports. No one would know. Now, as far as I know, it isn't, but you have no way of verifying that. I have to go under my own name if I publish stuff online. Richard has to go under his own name. DK has his name and vocation fully out there on the internet if you want to look it up. These people can be held accountable. Now, Richard hasn't blocked any of these people, hasn't been hostile to any of these people. So actually, all the evidence suggests he doesn't think he's a self-appointed gatekeeper who gets to report on esports. This is just some bizarre cognitive dissonance responding to him criticizing someone presumably you like or you think should be allowed to report on esports. Okay, it's not an argument, as my boy Stefan Molyneux would say. 600 points. This is from the online game where Config's Optic played poorly against MSL's North. And if you remember, when Config left North, because he'd been benched beforehand, there was a bit of animosity, and that came out in some playful banter where Config said to MSL, who had said that he was going to be honest in 2018 and just give his real thoughts and not kind of pander with PR, he said, you know, in this, something like, to be honest, like in the spirit of being honest, next time we play, I will have 3 times your kills. Now, when you consider MSL is an absolute bot as an individual player and an in-game leader, which means it's even harder to be a good fragger, yes, and Config's a superstar player and particularly a very high fragging player. It's actually a pretty reasonable statement. It's pretty good banter all and all, nice little bit of shit talking hype on the next match. So anyway, because they played this online game, and I think actually that North might have even 16-0'd one of the games, this comment comes up where people want to like bring up the banter, and it says, Config said he will get 3 times MSL's kills. Well, MSL just got 7 times his and also 16-0'd him. That's a permanent shut the fuck up and play. This guy, 131 points, reasonably responds. Config did beat him on LAN last week, but I guess that doesn't matter because it's Config. Original guy, 16-0 and 3-16 is a lot more mouth shutting than whatever happened last week, especially since Config is the one starting the banter. That's literally the worst thing that can happen to someone who likes to trash talk. So first of all, the argument that like losing 16-0 and someone having 7 times your kills in an online game, I think there's even a qualifier, is a permanent shut the fuck up and play. It definitely isn't. First of all, banter keeps going. That's the whole thing that's fun. You shit talk when you win, he shit talk when he wins, or he shit talks to downplay what you did, or you shit talk when he did something well to say, oh, well, you just got carried by your team. That's the nature of shit talking. It's not supposed to be taken seriously either, like this guy is here. Definitely not a permanent shut the fuck up and play. That misses the entire point. Also, the idea that like an online game would be a permanent shut the fuck up and play. And as this guy says here, Config had just beaten MSL on LAN the week before. Who the fuck gives a shit about an online game? It's fun for the banter, but again, you're taking it seriously. So as he says here, just because it's Config and Config's known to talk shit, people want to hate on Config and be like, haha, who cares about the actual real LAN game, you know, high-level Counter-Strike that you played last week directly head-to-head on LAN with no mad online circumstances. MSL just beat you in a semi-meaningless online game. Haha, that's a permanent shut. No, it isn't. It isn't at all, mate. I don't know what world you're in. That's shit banter. It's also not factually accurate. Then the idea that like losing 16-0 and going 3-16 is more mouth-shutting than losing on LAN. I mean, it just isn't, is it? And then the idea that that's literally the worst thing that can happen to somebody who shit trash talks. What, to do badly in one map of online play? Nah, I think actually going to a big LAN, being in a big high pressure match against that guy and totally bombing would probably be the worst. 83 points. This is from the thread about the MIBR guys going from SK Gaming to MIBR. 83 points. This one is, because this is some pure fan logic. This is like an SK, now MIBR fan, at the end of their rope, just desperate to do mental gymnastics and gather together some reason as to why their team has been, relative to the level of the players and previous form, dog shit in 2018, but he wants to believe it can all turn around. So he says here, my last hope is that the last 6 months were just the guys fucking around, not wanting to pull much weight for an org they were already leaving. And from now on, Mastermind Fallen will uncover 6 months of sandbag strats. Amen. Now, I get, by the way, he's even said 6 months of sandbag strats and Mastermind Fallen. It's a little bit facetious, but I also think there's a little bit of truth there. Like, he kind of hopes this narrative could be real. First of all, there's no such thing as 6 months of sandbag strats. Like, strats that you came up with 6 months ago will be massively outdated. To the extent that they work, they always would have worked. The idea that you invented like 6 months worth of strats that people or didn't in parallel develop or figure out based on other things you did is fairly unreasonable. Like every time people talk about Fallen and his strats and him getting red now because they were on top, I get the sense that they have no clue about how teams are set up and what you run in terms of your playbook and what you scout. Like the idea you've got all fresh shit and that no one has to have scouted you for you to have a chance to win is ludicrous. I mean, everyone's scouting Astralis now. It's not changing anything. They're still bodying everyone from T-side of Nuke where you know what they're going to run. So then the idea that like for 6 whole months, they've just been fucking around purposely throwing games or sandbagging because they didn't want to try for SK, right? First of all, let's imagine that premise is true. Then the guys from SK, the players, are pieces of shit because they're getting paid an enormous salary by the SK org. They're getting sent to tournaments by the SK org. The SK org has supported them up to that point. Yes, I know at this point in time they were having certain friction and problems getting resources from them. But the idea that like you sign a contract, your job is to be a top professional player and for your own reasons you should want to win anyway. But then you decide to fuck over your org who's still paying you your working salary just because you think that they haven't been as nice for you and you're going to leave. Well, then you're just a piece of shit as a person, quite frankly. I've been in jobs where I had arguments with my bosses and I told them, right, I want to hand in my notice now, 2 weeks, 4 weeks. I still did all my work before I left. I didn't just go, haha, I'm not going to do any of my work, suck my dick, and then just take my cash, because guess what? That would be a terrible work ethic and ethical standard to uphold. And on a personal level, it would show I have basically no fucking moral standards, right? I can fuck over anyone as long as I don't like them and I'm not going to work with them anymore, or I feel slighted by them. I personally don't think that's reasonable. And then the idea also that as a player, remember, players get the majority of the prize money. Right, you've already got your salary from the org. It would make no sense to fuck around in tournaments and do badly for the org, since if you're going to leave, then they're going to go, great, well, they were shit anyway at the end, so I'm glad they've left. They don't have to pay them anymore. Secondly, I mean, I already paid them their salary. I already got my sponsorship dollars off them, but they just denied themselves like 90% of the prize money or more. Well, then they're the idiots, right? That's money that would have been in their pockets. Lastly, the idea that this team was just fucking around is just absolutely ludicrous. I can tell you from behind the scenes, it's not the case at all. They've been trying as much as they can. They've looked for every solution. That's why they've done a lot of role swaps, in-game leader swaps, signed up different players, tried changing the map pool. That's because they've really wanted to win, because they're competitive guys. They hate not being on top. So, ludicrous narrative. This is from, I think it was ESL1 Cologne, where 56 points, it said, it was where they did the talent announcement for the English talent. It said, can we get a Russian talent post? I don't use Facebook. Now, I don't actually have any critique or comment on this. I just think it's actually good banter. Like, most of the comments are like, haha, who watches anyway on Facebook? Haha, I don't watch on Facebook. That's for, like, first of all, half those people are liars. They definitely do just watch the embed on hltv.org. Then second, and if they don't, more fool them. They're missing some great Counter-Strike. And then secondly, that's just the most tired, played out aspect. This guy took the same joke, the same gist, but actually made it funny because he didn't spell it out. He just made it like, can we get a Russian talent post? Because obviously he's just watching the Twitch stream on the Russian Twitch stream on Twitch, right? That's where he normally goes. At least that's actually funny, to be honest. This was from a thread about the players from SK leaving, SK going to MIBR. It's 20 points. It says, SK refused to give the players, I don't know if it was about Stu and Bolts belonging to IMT, places to boot camp. So SK had to participate in smaller tournaments to organise boot camp locations with organisers themselves. Scummy for SK, they're obliged to fulfil the players' needs until the contracts run out. And SK was already known as a scummy org. So first of all, when it says here that they didn't give them a boot camp. Now, there's many top teams don't give their teams boot camps or give them one sporadically or just before majors. So the idea that like every big org is obligated to give their teams boot camps whenever they want is definitely not the case. Then when he says that SK is obliged to fulfill the players' needs until the contracts run out, well, you don't know what the contract says. So how would you know what their needs are and what SK's part of the agreement is? For all you know, it might just say we will provide 2 boot camps a year. Maybe SK's already given them their boot camps that year. Does it say in the contract that we'll get a boot camp whenever they want? I doubt it personally. So why they're obligated to fulfill their needs in that sense, I don't know. You are purely speculating on that. Yet you're taking information you have no understanding of and construing that SK as a scummy org. Why that means SK was already known as a scummy org, I don't particularly know. I've already addressed it in a video myself. Never actually seen any evidence for it. I've just heard a lot of hearsay and reputation slandering, character assassination. And as the old saying goes, a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth's had a chance to put its trousers on. This is from the thread where Simple was the MVP, I think it was for HLTV.org, of the CSGO Asia Championships, that tournament where they beat Virtus Pro in the final, and Envious and Tai Lu and an NIP, and these squads were all there. So 56 points, and this guy says, he's talking about Simple, I mean, he sort of won it because Na'Vi won the event. Lecro, Scream, Bialy, and even Forrest all had higher ratings than him, but he still had the highest rating on the team, and it'd be pretty strange for the MVP to have not even played in the finals. Now, the second part at least starts to add some of the context as to why those players he listed wouldn't win the MVP. Now, here's the thing. Generally, I don't think the MVP has to be from the winning team. Obviously, when a team wins the event, first thing you should do is look if any of their players were the standout player of the tournament and give them some degree of weighting and advantage. So, for example, if Simple's godlike in an entire tournament, but Astralis is incredibly dominant and Device still has extremely good numbers and maybe played the best in the final or as good as Simple, you can see an angle for giving Device the MVP there. But otherwise, if Simple's far and away better than even Device or any of the Astralis players, Simple should win the MVP, even if he was just in the finals. Now, if they're not even in the finals, now it starts to get tougher because they don't play as many matches. They didn't play in the most high pressure match. I could still see an example of a Simple being so ludicrously good they might be the MVP, but it's going to be extremely rare in that scenario. So why he would list people like Lecro, by the way, someone who went out in the first round of the playoffs, Scream, someone who went out top 4, Bialy, someone in the final, but who didn't necessarily play all the same hard opponents, and Forrest, someone who also went out before even the top 4. Now, people who didn't even make top 4 at the tournament, bear in mind, this is a tournament where you only played like 2 series in the group, and then you come through to the playoffs. So that means that Forrest played like 3 series in this tournament. Why would he be an MVP candidate compared to someone in the final who played like minimum 4 series, in certain cases 5 series it could have been? Why would he, with that few maps in comparison and numbers that aren't even much better, and obviously it's a lot easier to get a high rating and high stats the less games you play and the less games against the elite teams you play. So actually it doesn't really make a lot of sense to even bring up that players that finished 5th to 6th had higher ratings. Yeah, congrats. They didn't even play the top teams as much or go as deep or play as many maps. What do you expect? This is from a thread that was about, I think it was when Taco became the highest earner in Counter-Strike. And this is 24 points. And this guy says, Roffle, it's crazy to think that Fallen has only won 6k in 1.6. Now, I know what he means. Like, he thinks of Fallen, he thinks that's a famous Brazilian player. How could he have only won 6k? Like, he must have been in loads of tournaments. First of all, Fallen was not a very famous Counter-Strike 1.6 player. Even for Brazilian players, the XMIBR guys were much more famous. FNX was much more famous. Bit was much more famous. You had players like Knack, Bruno. These guys have been around a lot longer. They'd won majors, or they'd been in the finals of majors. They made deep runs at majors. They had won international tournaments. Fallen had done none of these things effectively. He only came around the last few years. He replaced Kogu in the squad that later became Fire Gamers, was the XMIBR squad. They basically, because they weren't in MIBR, they didn't have the same sponsorship. It wasn't until they got to Complexity that they had half decent sponsorship. They didn't go to many of the big international tournaments, just some of them, and they didn't go very far there. Fallen was the best player, but he was a young talent, and he wasn't close to one of the best players in the world. So actually, it's not that crazy, because he didn't have a lot of top finishes in the big tournaments. And in the last few years of 1.6, we're talking like 2009, 2012, the tournaments were very top heavy. Like first place might be 25,000 or 30,000. Then second place might be like 15,000. Third place might be like 10,000 or 5,000. After that, there might be no prize money, or you might start to go down so that by the time you get to 8th place, if there's even prize money, it might be like $500. So actually, it's not that crazy that Fallen only won 6k. That's actually quite reasonable. Didn't make that many tournaments, didn't make that many top placings, wasn't a very tenured 1.6 player. He's a legend mainly for what he did in CSGO. 371 points. This was from the thread about Richard talking about his theory about referencing that he had a theory on Doc to Face It Mikey on Twitter. This is a few months back now. So it says, this man says, I've got my own theory as to why that is, but I doubt you'll want to hear it. As if that ever stopped him before. Now, what this guy completely ignores the context of and doesn't reference here in his comment is that Richard didn't just do a tweet saying, I've got my own theory as to why Doc is like this, but I doubt you'll want to hear it here. And then just go, so basically come out and go, I've got a secret, but I'm not going to tell any of you. He didn't do that. What he did was he replied in a tweet to Face It Mikey saying to him, I've got my own theory as to why that is, but I doubt you'll want to hear it. Now in this setting, I think Richard's probably right. Face It Mikey probably didn't particularly care because it's some sort of an abstract theory about whether or not Doc was lying and what was going on with the situation, and maybe he's cheating, or maybe behind the scenes he's fraudulent in terms of who he claims to be, and Mikey at this point in time hadn't had a chance to meet him, probably wouldn't care initially because it's not really any reason, just a guy playing an FPL. You don't have to have such a higher level standard of evidence. It's not a fucking courtroom. But the point is, Richard was talking to Mikey. He's saying Mikey doesn't want to hear it. He's not saying everyone in the world. Like, Richard didn't put this tweet onto Reddit himself or reference it. You're doing that. You're referencing that. But you're acting as though Richard's the one broadcasting this to the world. He didn't. And he wasn't the one doing that. So the context makes no sense at all. This is from a thread where this comment has 400 points, and it says, albeit in its 4th major iteration, pre 1.6, 1.6, CS Source, CSGO, I still remember plenty of people being very upset about the release of 1.6 and how that was handled by Valve. 1.6 was the first release of CS that required Steam. So there were 2 main reasons why people were upset by CS 1.6 coming out. One, as you referenced, it made you have to have Steam. And at the time, that was actually quite scandalous. Because the thing about Steam is, you can't use it, at least you couldn't back then initially, without having an active internet connection. And remember, this is back in 2003. There are still many people who don't have a stable internet connection, who don't have permanent internet access on their PC, who in their countries don't have internet access all the time, want to be able to just log into the internet, dial up on their modem when they're going to play a particular game. So that alone was quite scandalous because you already bought the game. You've already been playing the game for years on one net, and so now you have to suddenly install this new piece of software to play the game that you already bought, and you have to be online all the time to be able to, at the time, to watch demos, to be able to play the game. That was actually quite scandalous, and with good reason. The other reason why is they added that stupid riot shield initially for the first few weeks, which completely ruined the pub environment and was completely stupid. And it even had a bug initially so that you could still shoot people while people couldn't shoot through you because the shield could be toggled so it was bugged on and off at the same time. So it was terrible, and people in pro play just had to have a gentleman's agreement not to allow it to be bought. So that was quite stupid. Beyond that, I've never understood why people always say this. I know Richard always says it himself. I mean, to be fair, he was quite young in esports at the time. People always say about how crazy the scene went when 1.6 came out. 1.6 wasn't that big a deal. It was quite like 1.5, slightly different graphics. Obviously, it was on Steam and had a couple of changes, like the AWP having to fully rescope instead of just coming back out again, switching from a knife to an AWP like people used to. But even then, those changes were pretty minor to the actual mechanics of the game. The one that people went crazy about was the change from 1.3 to 1.5, because that's where they added the jumping slowdown, so you couldn't jump constantly and dodge as well and have proper air accel. You slowed downloads. And then also they changed the spray so that it had a few more random RNG elements to the spray, about 6 to 8 bullets in. And so you couldn't just spray a full clip and be amazing at spray and control it like a Heaton would. I mean, a great example would have actually been an old school player called Smurfer for Game Online, who was fabulous at exactly that sort of full auto spray the whole clip. And by the way, I know it's called a magazine, but I call it a clip, so I'm going to keep calling it that. So fuck y'all. So I always think people overplay that, and it actually shows that they're actually not as old school as maybe they imagine, because it was really 1.3 to 1.5 that was the big change, and was quite frankly the one where even a number of top pro players like Medion just said, fuck this, I'm not even playing this game anymore, and basically just retired and didn't want to play it anymore. This was one of the threads about Sadikist dropping an N-bomb on stream, and this has 255 points, as this guy gives a little anecdote. And the reason why this is weird is because, first of all, it has 255 points, but you're going to see, I don't really know still what the point he was actually trying to make within the story is. He says, I remember one night I got drunk in a nightclub, then started arguing with people. Apparently, I also called the bouncer the N-word, because he was black, and I was pissed off. Next day, I didn't remember this, went back to the club, and the bouncer told me this. But he said, we didn't hammer you because they knew I wasn't racist, just trying to piss people off because I was mad. Moral of the story, not saying it's okay, but sometimes you say stuff that you don't really mean or think, but you just trying to be edgy, or in my case, trying to piss people off. Moral 2, stay off the booze, kids. Always bad stuff happen with it, especially when you grow up. Okay, so I guess actually the end of it does sort of explain it. Like, his point was that he's not a racist himself, and he probably would never do that in the light of day or sober, but in this scenario, when he was drunk enough, cause it happened to be a black person who he was arguing with or getting annoyed with, then he used the N-word just to be edgy and try and hurt that guy's feelings or diss the guy in a way he thought would be effective. So I guess that does make some sort of sense. It doesn't really apply quite frankly to the Sadikist case, except that he did something that was out of character for him as a person, somewhat because he was drunk, and also maybe in a weird frame of mind or something. It was his birthday, and people were pissing him off. So sure, I guess there's some connection there. Kind of a weird story though. Fair play to this guy that he actually can admit it though, and he can tell that story, because one of the things that pisses me off about Sadikist type scenarios is all the people who become like mad pearl clutchers and moral paragons who make out like they've never said a slur ever in their life, never would even think of doing it, and never privately say anything. Because one thing that tilts me about the world is people who act, because in public we have a social consensus of what we're allowed to say and supposed to do, act as though they and themselves perfectly align with that, even though the majority of people I've ever known in my life didn't align with that, even if they pretended to. Right, this is a great one. 103 points. You don't need to know what thread it's from or who he's even talking about, because it's the same stupid logic anyway. No one is hating on him, lol. Just because 2 brain-dead Twitter users said something bad doesn't mean he is getting hate, right? First of all, what does define getting hate? I mean, I would guess this guy doesn't think anything someone tweets at you is getting hate. He thinks it's just par for the course. You can tweet anything at someone in terms of text, like even kill yourself, and that's just a comment, isn't it? And so who cares about Twitter users? Also, like every other pleb in the world, he can only envision Twitter the way it would be if he used Twitter. So for him, two people sending him a message is like, wow, you think that's hate? Just getting two messages. Famous people with like 100,000, 150,000, 200,000 Twitter followers, they might get hundreds of messages that aren't even to their tweets. I get messages that people at me, just telling me some shitty thing that's not even apropos of anything, not even replying to something. When I do tweets, sometimes there'll be nothing to do with them. And like it might be a tweet about like, oh, Nico had an amazing game. And you'll get all the comments like, wow, how about praise Cold Zera, who's not even in the fucking game because it's an idiot former SK Brazilian fan. So people like that have no clue what it's like to get hundreds, thousands of unsolicited messages of people just being a cunt to you. So as usual, someone who thinks that people aren't being hated on, that they shouldn't make such a big deal about it, doesn't even have basic human empathy or the ability to have compassion for what another person's entirely different life experience might be like. Can't imagine that guy could be one of the shitty cunts who tweets you, right? This is in a thread in which DK had said that Stewie2K was the highest buyout in CS, but that he couldn't name the exact figure. So 21 points. Quote, I have no idea how much they paid, but what I can say for sure is that it was the most ever paid. How does that make sense? Well, pretty simple. Are you ready for a scenario in which that could both be true and yet also not be a scenario where DK could know how much it was? Are you ready? Someone from Cloud9 or MIBR/Immortals could have said to DK, well, DK, the buyout was the highest in CSGO history, but I can't tell you the exact amount. Are you ready? There we go. He's just confirmed it. There's a corroboration for exactly what DK has said. It doesn't have to be false. They're not at all mutually exclusive clauses. And it does make a lot of sense. Then also, you could have had someone could have said, I can't tell you the exact amount, DK, but the ballpark figure was over $100,000 more than the previous highest ever transfer, which also nobody maybe knows the exact detail of. Likewise, the player could have just said, it was a lot of money, dude. Trust me, a lot of money. And then when he then asked other people, they just said, I can't say how much, but it was more than any I've ever seen before. You see what I mean? It's not really even a fucking mystery anymore, is it? Why do people vote this shit? This is from a thread where this guy was talking about, like, should we change the CZ? He says, 316 points, not much. I'd increase the price by $100 to $200, maybe make the Deagle and CZ both $650. I don't get why people are so obsessed with the idea that you should always be able to win against Deagle/CZ with guns. This is how 1.6 was, and pro games were boring because only gun rounds mattered. So 30 to 50% of all rounds had no tension. Right, first of all, in terms of the part of just increasing the money, that doesn't really fix anything, because if the CZ's incredibly OP and very, very useful for top pros, they're going to get the kills anyway and then get the guns from them, so making it more expensive doesn't really change anything. If they were losing the round anyway, then it wasn't the lack of $100 extra that was costing them. Then there's the kill reward as well, which has obviously been a problem in the past. Now, when he says that he doesn't get why people are obsessed with the idea you should always be able to win against Deagle/CZ with guns, that is a mad straw man. I'm not aware of any credible person, even people on Reddit, who think that you should always be able to win against them. I've never heard that. I think what people think generally, and this has been the consensus I've seen, is that you should probably win against them, let's say 75 to 80% of the time. And then let's say if you're against a pure Glock or USP, that should be like 85 to 90%. That seems about reasonable for me. At the moment, when you're talking about the elite teams, I would guess it's more like you win maybe 60 to 65% of the time against the CZ/Deagles. Maybe 70 to 75%. So actually, I think he's done the classic thing where someone has a reasonable perspective. He thinks the entire opposite. So he's made their comment the entire opposite as a straw man to easily defeat the straw man, to then go into his own scenario for why a totally fucked up situation in the metagame, which actually I think degrades the level of play and entertainment value, because it just becomes a bunch of lotto RNG morons just shooting who aren't even aiming. And he thinks that's cool, apparently. And so he doesn't make a case for why it's cool. He just attacks a straw man of the other one. He then says that's how 1.6 was. And pro games were boring because only gun rounds mattered. Absolutely not true. I think 1.6 was actually more entertaining, and in part because of the streamlined flowchart nature of, do you have money and guns for this round? No. Well, you better do something incredibly creative or make a great read, otherwise you're not going to win this eco/low econ round, and the other team's going to get their rounds. It's like holding serve in tennis. Now it's your turn to serve. Can you now win some points? Otherwise you're trying to deny the other guy. Like, I think that was actually a cool aspect of made games much more tactical and have much better flow to them. They weren't just bullshit where, oh, we were winning the game, we'd done everything right, and he just sat around the corner and did some lucky spray with the CZ into two guys' heads that he couldn't even aim all the bullets because of how the spray works. Then when he says 30 to 50% of all rounds had no tension, that's absolutely categorically false. It's not even that that's an opinion. That's factually not vaguely true. I mean, 50% of the rounds were never people just on ecos. Then you've got to add in, we already had a level of force buys with FAMASs, with Galils towards the end. Sometimes you'd just buy 3 rifles or 4 rifles and have one guy without and he could pick one up. So that's not true at all. People already had mastered saving in the last few years of 1.6 and actually would save quite heavily, even sometimes if they had 3 men alive versus 5 men who planted in a site and they thought it wasn't worth it and they wanted to save for the next round. So actually it forced teams to play more economically stringently or to risk. Force buys are supposed to be gambles. They're not supposed to be like, they work most of the time. We've got skilled players, so let's just do it 60% of the time and have it work. No, and have it work 60% of the time, like Na'vi does. That doesn't make sense to me that that's a good scenario for the game. This is from the thread where Fallen was complaining about a sponsor using his likeness in the advert, him and Cold Zera, even though it actually turned out they were actually a sponsor of his team, SK Gaming. This guy, 25 points, says, Fallen sold his image rights to SK Gaming? Obviously, Fallen sold his image rights to SK Gaming. The number one priority and essentially main purpose of esports orgs as they stand at this moment is they are basically like what your agent would be in a field like basketball, the entertainment industry of Hollywood. They take your image rights and they sell them on to other people for sponsorships, etc. That's how they get the sponsorships for your team to then pay you the salary and send you around the world. It's not like in basketball where LeBron owns his image rights and chooses who he sells them to through his agent. Basically, because obviously the Cavaliers didn't own LeBron's image rights entirely. In this scenario, the thing that Fallen gets his salary for isn't even placing highly in tournaments. It's actually for giving his image rights to SK Gaming to then use with their sponsors to make money, which they then use to pay Fallen's salary. That is the in business we are in. Same thread, 45 points. This is really embarrassing in my opinion. Severely lacking communication from SK management. 24 points. Bet SK doesn't even care. LMAO. Contract's ending, so might as well milk some last from the cow. Right? The idea that just because the contract's ending, like SK is not allowed to sign new sponsors and do deals with them, including while they still have players under contract they're paying an ungodly inflated amount to per month to use their likeness. What, they're supposed to go, oh, well, they're leaving soon, so while you're still under contract, I won't use your likeness. I'm so greedy trying to milk the last money out of the cow. By the way, if you want to talk about people milking money out of the team and behaving in an unethical manner, how about the SK players not even wearing jerseys of a team paying them their salaries? Then when he says it's really embarrassing, no, the really embarrassing part and the lack of communication is on Fallen's part, because he didn't even Google SK Gaming and then the name of the company in question, because if he had, the second link down was there's the partnership being announced between SK Gaming and this particular sponsor. So if he'd have just Googled it before he did his tweet, he could have found out that his team was sponsored by it. He's the one who didn't put in any effort to actually find out who sponsors him and just came out and basically talked mad shit on someone who was sponsoring his team, which is part of how his team SK got the money to pay him his salary every month, and just was really unprofessional, quite frankly. The main person to blame here is absolutely Fallen. He also, by the way, called out ESL for featuring on their stream this commercial, even though ESL in no way is obliged to go to Fallen and say, by the way, are you actually, is your team allowing their likeness to be used? His team's already done the deal with the sponsor. It's a totally legit sponsor. His team's the one that deals with the ESL. ESL has nothing to do with them. So he also called out ESL, didn't apologise for that, by the way. So actually quite ridiculous behaviour. Last one. This was in a thread where I think this was, let me see, which final would this have been? I mean, if it was Nico doing well in the final, I'm going to guess maybe Katowice final? I think so. Because it says 5 months ago. It says 80 points. Nico really wanted it. 180 points. How unreasonable is this? He probably should have played well then. He had a rough final, right? The idea that like how much you want it manifests in how well you play in the game is one of the stupidest sports narratives that were ever created by lazy sports journalists. A lot of them who just don't understand the game. And so all they do is create narratives outside of the game that have no connection to the game. And basically are the kind of narratives that would be in a Hollywood script, like a biopic of someone's life, where it never would have happened in real life that way. But that's the artistic license they had to make it a story, to add like a mythological component to it. There are tons of players who, I won't tell you who they are, but they're shit in the game or they're low-level pros and they are desperately wanting it. They are practicing tons more than someone like, I mean, off the top of my head, Forrest or Screamer. But those guys, Forrest and Scream, would tear these guys up in the server. It doesn't matter how much you want it. And in fact, when you get to the top level and you're in a big final and you're an amazing player, sometimes wanting it too much means you're too emotionally invested. You don't have sort of a stoic distance from the game where you can not be results orientated and just make the correct decisions and pretend it's not a big final. And wanting it too much means you grasp and you hold on too tight, and it's like trying to hold on to sand. It's just going to run on water. It's just going to pour out of your hands, isn't it? You're not going to be able to keep hold of it all. I guess water would have been the better analogy there. It's not going to work, is it? So the idea that he obviously didn't really want it that much because he didn't win. What a fucking ludicrous statement that is. Also, Counter-Strike as a game isn't like Quake or StarCraft, mate. You can't always play your best game every single day. Sometimes you can be the best player in the world, like Simple is, and you have a game like you did against Team Liquid. It's just humdrum, just average, because it was the wrong day. Doesn't mean he didn't want it. Doesn't mean he's not a great player. Doesn't mean he's not the best player in the world. Just didn't work out on that particular day. It's a team game. There's 10 different players. There's a million variables going on, different maps. You don't know how much sleep he got, how he felt that particular day, whether he psyched himself out of the game, whether they gave him the wrong roles in the game, made some bad reads. He individually was in a bad... Who the fuck knows? It has nothing to do with how much you want it though. This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Alex Adams, Eddie Wingfors, Daniel Yordanov, Robert Baxter, Travis Greb, Kyla Harris, James Harding, Caesar, and special thanks go out to Matt Shakowski and Jerky's Minion in particular. Want teasers for my upcoming content? How about asking me a question for my monthly AMA? Do you want to take part in a discussion about esports with me? How about suggesting a topic or a guest for my content? Put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today.